about authorship. What I want to do, though, on this authorship panel is not just make it about authorship, but actually bring this a level up to talk about identity. Because when you start to begin to do this within your companies, I think it's not just the argument you want to make about authorship being important, but it's a larger concept about identity, as you guys know, reputation, and then we'll move into some other concepts as well. So, identity to authorship. There we go. Okay, I didn't have to go that way. All right, so first we'll talk about the background on identity and authorship. Then the status of authorship right now at Google. Next, how authorship helps searchers. Claiming your identity and authorship. And last, best practices. Okay, so of course we all know the background of traditional PageRank is about links. So it has to do with quality and quantity of links. So site A has some internal links, also links to site B, etc. This is kind of the faceless web built of links. Now, when it comes to profiles and identity, things get a little more interesting. You have now a faceful web. You still have things like your website, but now with different articles, you can actually start to link to profiles, and those profiles are about people. So now it's not just a web of links, it's a web of people as well. You can see how this starts to get a lot richer. So when it comes from identity to authorship, what we're talking about is identities, whether that's on Stack Overflow, which is a great gamification site, Twitter, Google+, and the reason why we focus on Google+ at Google is because, for the most part, a lot of identity and profile information is kind of behind a wall, or there's some type of login. But when it comes to Google+, obviously that's our identity management system. It's information we know about, we have access to. So that's what we're starting with now. So know that a lot of the stuff I talk about comes to Google+, but that is because it's our identity management system. And it's not that, and you'll see this as we talk more, it's not that this markup couldn't be extended even further. So this is the way that kind of identity can grow throughout the web. As many of you know, Google I/O is a conference I usually speak at. My team throws this developer conference in San Francisco. And there's going to be even bigger stuff going on there, also tied to identity, and can have impacts on authorship too. So it's all getting exciting. But here, right now we're in London. So identities, all this stuff, these sites where you have profiles and people know about you and your expertise. Add that to some of these people with identities are going to create content. And at that point, when you have identities creating content, you have authorship. So obviously not every single person on the web has to be an author. But you can see that once we have the identities and once we tie that to people who write content, we now can get to authorship. So please don't think about authorship just kind of siloed into one. It's actually part of a much larger concept of identity. And you can take this even a step further toward your company's reputation. So right now authorship is bound to individuals, not corporations. But you can imagine how this could go even bigger as identity is just only going to become kind of a bigger priority for people on the web. So this is important. It's extremely important because what it does is it gives you as a searcher, it gives you as anyone on the web, the ability to understand people's credibility and to purport your own reputation of credibility. So before, I'll do it this side this time, so I'm not favoring one side. Okay. So before we just have these boxes of websites and your company's website and those links, right, those kind of shaded boxes. Now, with authorship and identity, your company can have a Google+ page, an article can have an author, and then whoever wrote the author, like Othar, can have people who follow him, and they have people who follow them. And now we've tied in not just a web of links, but a web of all these people and relationships and meaning. Fabulous. So this is how all that credibility is now coming into account. Just individual links before, different pages filled with content, and now we've tied this kind of unstructured text to more relationships. And this is where we're going to gain credibility. So this doesn't come out very well, but authorship coverage is about 5x since it launched in April 2012, something like that. This is total impressions that have authorship in them. So you can just see the growth is expanding. Meaning that if you're thinking about starting kind of an identity within people in your company and thinking about authorship, the trajectory is going higher. And again, with the also kind of on that bandwagon of identity, it's going to keep growing. Within Google, more on status. There's 50+ ranking experiments that we've done. There's obviously a lot more in progress. We have more than 5 teams who specifically use authorship data in what they're working on. So if you need any more proof that this is a good investment, there's more. So let's talk about how about help searchers. And the reason why we bring this up is because I think a lot of times at conferences we get tied into how does this help my business or whatever, but the biggest goal is you're trying to help users out there, right? I mean, that's kind of, I mean, if you can help users, then it's going to help everything. So, first of all, credibility, as we talked about. It provides visible reputation about content creators. So Danny Sullivan has over 1 million people in his Google Plus circles. It also helps searchers because it informs social search. So you can highlight the content, we can highlight content you find relevant, and we can personalize results. Because now we know more about your identity than just your location. We know what you're interested in. So you can see for personalized results, there's a little person icon, like a head and shoulders, for the results that are inserted there because it's been personalized. So the third part I want to highlight is that it helps disambiguate and refine people searching. Kind of interesting. So Danny Sullivan, right? He's a race car driver, apparently. I don't follow a lot on race car stuff. But he's also first from search engine land. So not logged in. I do a search for Danny Sullivan, and the knowledge panel appears, and there's 2 Danny Sullivans, because they don't really know who am I searching for. Is it search engine land Danny Sullivan, or is the race Formula 1 driver Danny Sullivan? And they're not that different looking, actually. But they're 2 different people. But when I'm logged in, which is the bottom one, which many of you can't see, it actually is going to even prompt me with the right Danny Sullivan, right? Because it knows that I follow search stuff. So again, personalized results, people disambiguation. All right, so how do you get involved in this whole identity world within Google and authorship? How do you get started? And I'm sure many of you know this because you've read different blog posts or help center articles. But essentially, it comes down to an email verification or a handshake with your content. So the handshake means like, 2 people, right, handshaking. Okay, I did it by myself, but you can imagine that's 2 people. So if you do email verification, that essentially is saying, I belong to this company. I write for Wired.com, and my email address can be confirmed with having a Wired.com domain. Or if you don't want to do that's the simplest. If you don't do that, you can use rel author with a rel contributor. Again, that's the handshake. So the article says rel author this way. The profile says rel contributor this way, and they're shaking hands. Or you can use rel author to a profile on Wired, say, and then that can have a rel me to your Google Plus profile. So again, kind of creating double handshakes. The key about this, and this is the same thing you see when we talk about hreflang for different languages, when we talk about developing a smartphone site, it's that bidirectionality. It essentially is saying, in the same way, this profile corresponds to this article. There's that bidirectional. And it's the same way with smartphone sites. You say this mobile page corresponds to this desktop page. There's all this. So it's the same type of technique you see everywhere. So it seems perhaps a little confusing at first. Why do I need both? The reason why is so that someone else doesn't hijack your content or doesn't claim that you wrote something that was total crap, right? Because this way you're confirming on both sides. So essentially what it comes down to, and this is what is at the bottom, is kind of how we look at it within our systems, is that your profile is kind of creating a person node, whether it's your profile Google Plus or someplace else. And within that person node, you have all these different edges that kind of articles that you wrote or of different other profiles you have on the web. So I might have a Google Plus profile. I might have a Twitter profile. I might have something on YouTube. And so this is all kind of within this cluster of the person Miley-Oye. So now I've created this cluster, and that has these different edges, bidirectional edges of article A, article B, article C, of different things I've written. Or in the past I've written to things. So you can see this the same way that we talk about content on the web and duplicate content, right? And they create a cluster, and then we have to figure out what's the canonical. What you're doing with authorship and identity is creating your own cluster. And then all these different nodes, these edges of articles you've written and of the stuff that you enjoy, the people that you know. Okay. So that's a big part of claiming identity. So as I mentioned, email verification is the simplest. Because you just have to verify one email, and we can actually go back, and as we reprocess these documents, we see that same byline. We can add it to documents you wrote in the past. If you use rel author markup, you have to go back to these old articles and actually still add rel author on them. So articles I wrote in 1999 or whatever, 2003, I have to actually go and actually manually add the rel author. But if I just use email verification, it proves that I have this relationship with this domain, like example.com, with my I did Prince Charming, let's say he's got a Google Plus profile and he wrote an article. He verifies his email address, and now every article that we find with the byline Prince Charming, we know belongs to him. See how that works? So that's pretty cool. I would say that is definitely the most ideal way to go. And this is the byline extraction we've had around for Google News for years, right? We've had to do this anyway for Google News, so we've just kind of used it now for authorship. The second one is, again, getting to the handshake. So if you don't use email verification, then you get into the profile with rel author, where the article says rel author to a profile. We all know this. But that is not enough, right? Because you need the bidirectionality. So the step 2 is if you have a rel author to a profile, your profile has to have a rel contributor to the article. And then we have the handshake, and everything is good. Okay, fabulous. You can also use, as we talked about, rel me to chain different pages together. So rel author to a rel me to your Google Plus profile. Kind of this chain going along. So people get confused sometimes. Do I use a rel author here, or do I use a rel me? Start with, on your article page, a rel author, and then pretty much use a rel me all the way through. If you do make a mistake, know that our heuristics are not trying to break this chain. We're trying to make sure it makes sense. We're trying to build this cluster for you. So do it the best you can, and if you have questions, you can ask in our forum. You can ask me after this session. But we are trying to put this together. It's not something we're trying to penalize you for if you have wrong or any of that stuff. So we're trying to make this work. Okay. So getting into kind of the last part, there's a few more slides, because I know I have a short time. Authorship is a subset of structured data. This is what I want you to realize as well. It's not just part of identity. It actually gets into structured data, and that's an entirely new direction, like a new world. It's actually been around for a while, but Google with Knowledge Graph is paying attention to structured data even more. So structured data is the big circle that includes things like rich snippets for events, markup for profiles, markup for reviews. Authorship is one part, and it uses rel author, which you can't necessarily see. But that is taking all these links that were on the web, those faceless links, and we didn't know what they were about, what they were linking to. But when you add structured data like authorship, now we know this isn't, we knew it was kind of an article, but now we know that this link doesn't correspond to an ad or doesn't correspond to an image. It corresponds to specifically the author of the article because you included that structured markup of rel author. So this is the kind of the great part, right, is that we talked about identity needing these profiles. We talked about all these articles on the faceless web needing to have an author. And now we're moving into, when we have this markup, we're moving to this world of structured data too. So when you talk to the people at your company about authorship, remember you're bringing up larger issues of identity, and you're talking about, should we be thinking about a general shift or being agile so that we can move towards structured data in the future, toward having more links that explain what they're about so that applications like search engines know what they're processing and can get better results, such as the stuff like in Knowledge Panel, where we actually say, we know Danny Sullivan, we know when he was born, we know his education, because we have all this structured markup about him. So this is just for a person. And a lot of what you see in the Knowledge Panel is about kind of some Wikipedia stuff, general facts. But imagine as we break this out even more, having it more about what we know about a store, what we know about a business, all kind of the structured markup that we're looking at. So let's get into best practices. Keep your author consistent on the article URL. If your URL, let's say it's your homepage, starts to switch, you shouldn't have authorship on your homepage. But let's say you have like a blog and you keep putting an author at the top, but it's always like MileyOya.com and it's a different author every time because the URL with the blog switches every article I post. Our heuristics will start to negate that because we don't want to see an author flipping, right? Because that's not the normal use of an article. So that tells us if this article, this URL keeps flipping authors, we know it's probably not a legitimate article in that sense where we should be displaying information about the author, and so we'll kind of, our heuristics will break that. So for an article URL, keep the author consistent just to be safe. If it changes once or twice, not as big a deal, but aim for consistency. Of course, verify your markup with the structured data testing tool. This used to be called the rich snippets testing tool. So you can tell if we've actually extracted your structured data markup. Next, include authorship only on relevant authored articles. Obvious, I think, but we do see it on rentals or product listings, and that's not the correct use. And our heuristics will start to break that even more commonly. So again, we know your identity, right? We know your company's identity because this is what you've shown us. So try to do things in a legitimate way so that we actually use your authorship correctly. Next, be aware that it's hard to merge or transfer authorship if you create a Google profile with a company email and then you leave the company. So we see this happen a lot. I signed up with my company email here, but I no longer work for them. I don't have anything legitimate with them. Can I transfer it entirely to my other profile? And it's not that way. So usually you want to create your profile if you're an author with your personal account. And then that way you can have contributor links to all these different companies that you work for. And last is that, and this is my last point of all, is that authorship is part of a larger, and their concept of identity and structured data. So when you invest in authorship, you're also thinking about investing in these two larger ideas that are kind of the way that we see search moving in the future, right? Tying in identity, tying in structured data. Okay, so Google I/O is today, so there's more to come. Cool stuff, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Miley.